Orchestrated high-impact narrative rewrite with shocking opening and pacing improvements. Della McAllister drove the knife into the frozen barn door and used it as a handhold to stay upright. Her legs had stopped working right 3 miles back. Jasper was on her hip, burning with fever, his weight pulling her sideways into the snow. Nora was strapped to her chest under the coat, too cold and too quiet for a baby who usually screamed. And somewhere behind her sternum, the third one kicked. Hard, furious, as if even the unborn knew they were running out of time. She didn't pray. She'd stopped praying in Colorado when they lowered Roy into frozen ground and handed her a bill for the pine box. She just kept moving. The light in the cabin window was the first good thing she'd seen in 4 days. If this story already has your chest tight, hit that subscribe button right now and ring that notification bell. You do not want to miss what happens next. Drop a comment and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Della's story travels. Now let's go back to Wyoming, December 1887, and find out what one desperate mother and one broken man did to each other's lives. She didn't knock. She hit the door with her shoulder because her hands weren't free. Jasper on her hip, Nora strapped to her chest. Her belly so heavy and low, she'd stopped standing straight 2 days ago. When the door swung open and the man filled the frame, big, dark-haired, lantern in hand, she didn't say please. She didn't say help. She looked him straight in the eyes and said the only true thing she had left. "My boy is burning up, and I can't carry him anymore." The man looked at her, at Jasper, at Nora, at her belly, the whole of it in 2 seconds flat. Then he stepped aside. "Get in here," he said. That was all. No questions, no conditions. Just those 3 words, and the heat from his stove hitting her face like an open hand. And Della McAllister, who had not cried once since Colorado, felt her throat close so hard it hurt. She didn't cry. She walked in. Cole Hargrove shut the door behind them, and the wind stopped. Just like that. 1 second it had been tearing at her back for 4 miles, and now there was only the pop of the fire and the smell of coffee and a wooden floor under her ruined boots. Jasper's head lolled against her shoulder. She pressed her hand to his forehead. Still burning. "Put him here." The man had already spread his own coat on the rug in front of the hearth. He crouched down, cleared space, moved with the efficiency of someone who acted before he thought. "By the fire. Come on." Della knelt, and the kneeling was the hardest thing she'd done all night, because her knees had gone to wood somewhere around the 3rd mile. But she got down and laid Jasper on the coat and pulled the wet scarf from around his neck, and his eyes fluttered open, glassy and confused. "Mama." His voice was a thread. "Right here." She pressed her lips to his forehead, burning. "Right here, baby. You're okay." "You got more blankets?" she said to the man without turning around. Chest under the window. She heard him moving, heard the chest open. A blanket landed beside her, thick wool, and she wrapped Jasper in it and tucked it under his chin the way he liked, the way she'd done 400 nights before this one, and Nora stirred against her chest and made the beginning sounds of a cry. Shh. Della opened her coat, shifted the sling, and Nora quieted against her warmth. 3 months old, and already knew that sound meant food was coming. Smart girl. Roy's eyes and her own stubbornness. That was Nora in total. The man came back and crouched across from her, on the other side of Jasper. He set a tin cup of water near the boy's head and looked up at her. "How long has he had the fever?" "Since yesterday noon." "Is he keeping water down?" "When I can get it in him. He's been in and out since this morning." The man nodded, reached out and pressed the back of his wrist to Jasper's cheek. His hands were big, rough, the kind built by years of outdoor work. But he touched the boy with a careful gentleness that made something shift in Della's chest. "High," he said. "Not the highest I've seen. We need to get some water in him and keep him warm." He looked at her. "You got a name?" "Della McAllister." She met his eyes. "This is Jasper. And Nora." She paused. "There's another one coming. 8 months." "I know," he said. No surprise in his voice, no discomfort, just acknowledgement. "Cole Hargrove. This is my land. I saw your barn light from the ridge trail. I wasn't going to stop, but—" She looked at Jasper. "I didn't have a choice." "You always had a choice," Cole said. "You just made the right one." He stood. "I'll heat some broth. You eat anything today?" "We're fine." He looked at her the way you look at someone who just said something demonstrably false. "When did you last eat, Mrs. McAllister?" A pause. Outside, the wind hit the cabin walls like it was looking for a way in. "Yesterday morning," she said. Cole went to the stove. Della watched him move through his own kitchen, certain, unhurried, not performing for her benefit. And she conducted the assessment she'd been running since he opened the door. 40, maybe 42. Gray in the hair at his temples. No wedding ring, but a ring of lighter skin on that finger that hadn't faded all the way. The cabin was clean but sparse. One chair at the table, one cup on the shelf. The kind of sparse that meant he wasn't lazy. He was alone, and had been for long enough that one of everything felt normal. The closed door down the hall caught her eye. She'd noticed it when they walked in. Just a door, but something about the stillness behind it, the particular quality of a room that hadn't been opened in a long time, sent a recognition through her she didn't want to examine. She knew about doors like that. Jasper coughed. She turned back to him, lifted his head, got a small amount of water past his lips. He swallowed without waking. Good. Cole set a bowl beside her without making a production of it. Salt pork broth, thick, and 2 pieces of cornbread. He set a second, smaller bowl across from her and sat down on the floor like it was the most natural thing, like he sat on the floor of his own cabin with strangers every night of the week. "Eat," he said. "The baby needs you to eat." Della opened her mouth to argue. She saw his face and closed it again. She picked up the cornbread and ate, and she didn't put it down until it was gone, and she didn't apologize for how fast she went through it. Cole didn't watch her. He watched the fire. He let her have that. When the broth was half gone and the sharp edge of the hunger had receded enough to think past it, she said, "We'll leave in the morning." Cole said nothing. "I don't want to be trouble," she said. "You're not." He prodded the fire with the iron. "But you're not leaving in the morning either." "Excuse me?" "Storm's not done." He nodded toward the window, where the wind was still throwing snow against the glass. Temperatures dropping another 10 degrees overnight. Drifts on the ridge trail will be chest high by morning. He looked at her steadily. "You go back out there tomorrow with those children, you won't make a mile." "I've made it this far." "You have," he said. "That's a fact. 4 miles in a blizzard, 8 months gone with a sick child and a newborn." He was quiet a moment. "But you don't have to make another step tonight. So don't." Della stared at him. She was 30 seconds from accepting, and she knew it. And she was also 30 seconds from making up some reason not to, because accepting help had burned her before. From people who offered it with one hand and held the bill in the other. From townspeople who opened their doors and then opened their mouths. From every stranger who'd smiled at her on the road and then stopped smiling when she couldn't pay. Cole Hargrove was watching her with the patient expression of a man who had nowhere urgent to be, and nothing to prove. "Why?" she said. "Why what?" "Why are you doing this? You don't know me." He thought about it, really thought about it, which surprised her. Most men answered that kind of question immediately, with the answer they'd prepared. Cole looked into the fire and was quiet for a beat. And when he spoke, he sounded like a man saying something true, rather than something polished. "Because it's the right thing," he said. "And because I've been wrong before about keeping my door shut." He glanced at the closed door down the hall, then away. "I don't intend to be wrong about it again." Della followed his glance. He caught her doing it. "My wife," he said, before she could not ask. "Eleanor. 6 years ago." Short, clean, the words of a man who'd said them enough times that they didn't bleed anymore, but hadn't gone numb either. "We were going to have children." He stopped there. "I'm sorry," Della said. "Long time ago." He stood. "You can take the bedroom. I'll sleep in the barn." "Cole?" She surprised herself by using his name. He stopped. "You don't have to go to the barn. I'll take the floor. Jasper'll need to stay by the fire anyway, and I need to be near him." He looked like he was going to argue. "It's your bed," she said. "Sleep in it." A pause. "The stove needs a log around 2 in the morning, or it'll run down." "I'll be up at 2. Nora'll see to that." Something flickered across his face. Almost a smile, but it didn't quite make it. He reached for his coat, pulled it on, paused at the door. "Mrs. McAllister." "Della." He nodded once. "If Jasper gets worse in the night, if the fever spikes or he won't wake, you come get me. Don't wait on it." "I will." He looked at her for one more moment, looked at Jasper sleeping by the fire, at Nora's small face visible above the sling, at the whole improbable situation that had appeared on his doorstep on the coldest night of the year. Something moved through his eyes that she couldn't name, and he wasn't going to explain. "Lock won't catch on that door," he said. "Latch is broken. Just push the chair under the handle." He went out. Della sat in the firelight and listened to his footsteps cross the frozen yard toward the barn and disappear. She looked at Jasper. His chest rose and fell, rose and fell. The fever flush on his cheeks was still there, but something in his small face had settled, the tight pinch of misery easing toward genuine sleep. Nora had gone quiet against her chest, nursing with the focused determination of a baby who decided not to be cheated. Della put the chair under the door handle. She didn't do it because she was afraid of Cole Hargrove. She did it because she'd made a promise to herself in Colorado, standing over Roy's grave, with 3 months left on the rent, and 2 children, and the 3rd coming. Nobody gets close enough to hurt them again. That was the deal. That was survival. She sat on the floor with her back against the hearthstone and watched her children sleep, and thought about the man who'd stepped aside without conditions and cooked broth and sat on his own floor like it cost him nothing. Around midnight, Jasper's fever broke. She felt it under her palm, the heat releasing, the body cooling back to something closer to right. He stirred, blinked up at her and said, "Mama, I'm hungry," in his normal voice, the one that meant he was back. She laughed, a real one, short and surprised and quiet so she didn't wake the baby. "I know you are," she said. "In the morning, okay? Sleep now." He closed his eyes immediately. He was out in 30 seconds. Della leaned her head back against the warm stone and looked at the ceiling of Cole Hargrove's cabin, and let herself, just for a minute, stop calculating. Just a minute. When the door down the hall pulled at her attention again, She let herself look at it straight. Dark wood, simple iron latch. The stillness behind it that she recognized because she'd had a box like that in Colorado that she hadn't opened for 2 months until Nora needed the quilt inside. She understood suddenly why Cole had stepped aside at the door. Not charity, not obligation. He knew what it looked like when someone was carrying what they couldn't set down. He'd been carrying the same thing, different weight, for 6 years. Nora finished nursing and sighed herself into sleep, heavy and warm and milk-drunk. And Della tucked her carefully into the folded blanket she'd arranged by the fire. She put a log on the stove at 2 in the morning. She did it before Nora woke up, which meant Cole had been right about the timing, and that irritated her slightly, which was the first normal thing she'd felt since Colorado. Outside, the snow fell and fell and fell. Inside, 3 people breathed. 4, if you counted the one not yet born, and the fire held. And the storm pressed against the walls and found no way through. In the barn, boots crunching across frozen hay, Cole Hargrove stopped walking and stood still in the dark for a long moment. He'd passed Eleanor's grave on the way. He always passed it. He'd built the barn that direction on purpose 6 years ago, in the black weeks after, when being near her was the only thing that helped. He didn't stop tonight. He'd just looked over, the way you glance at something familiar, and kept moving. That was new. He climbed to the hayloft, lay down in the dark, and pulled his spare coat over him. Through the barn wall and across the frozen yard, the cabin window glowed amber. He stared at it for a long time. He thought about a 4-year-old boy who'd walked 4 miles through a blizzard and still had enough left in him to put himself between his mother and a stranger. He thought about a woman who'd eaten 3 pieces of cornbread with quiet desperation, and then sat straight and looked him in the eye and refused to apologize for needing it. He thought about the closed door and what Della hadn't said about it, and how she hadn't said it, with the exact right kind of not saying that meant she already understood. Sleep didn't come for a long time, but somewhere around 3 in the morning, through the barn wall and the dark and the snow, he heard Nora cry. Heard Della's voice answer, low and steady as a river. Heard the crying stop. He closed his eyes. For the first time in 6 years, the silence that followed felt less like absence and more like something waiting. The held breath kind. The kind that comes just before a thing begins. He didn't know what to do with that yet, but he didn't push it away. And that, he thought, was probably where trouble always started. Not with the big moments, not with the dramatic declarations, but with the small surrenders. The log added to the fire. The bowl of broth set down without ceremony. The door held open in the dark. The moment you stopped pushing the warmth away. Outside, Wyoming was buried in white, and the temperature was still dropping, and the ridge trail was drifted over and impassable. They weren't going anywhere tomorrow. Cole Hargrove pulled his coat tighter and let himself, for the first time in 6 years, think the word morning with something other than dread. Morning came in through the frost-edged window, and Della was already awake. She'd been awake since 4, when Nora decided sleeping was optional, and the world was extremely interesting. She'd walked the baby in slow circles around the cabin, careful not to wake Jasper, watching the dark outside the window turn from black to gray to the particular white-blue of a Wyoming dawn after heavy snow. By the time Cole's boots crossed the frozen yard from the barn, she had coffee on, and Jasper's wet clothes hung near the stove to dry. Cole came through the door and stopped. She saw him take in the coffee, the clothes on the line, Nora propped against the folded blanket on the floor, batting at nothing with both fists. He had the expression of a man confronting something unexpected in his own kitchen. You didn't have to do that, he said. I was up anyway. She poured a cup and held it out. Sit down. You look like you slept on frozen hay. I did sleep on frozen hay. I told you to sleep in your bed. I know what you told me. He took the cup. He didn't sit, but he leaned against the counter and drank, and looked at Nora the way you look at something you're trying not to look at too hard. How's Jasper? Fever broke around midnight. He's still sleeping. She checked the oats on the stove. He'll be hungry when he wakes up. He's always hungry after a fever. It's like his body spends the whole sick time just waiting to eat. Cole said nothing, but the corner of his mouth moved. What? Della said. Nothing. He drank his coffee. You know his body well. I've been the only one watching it for 4 months. She said it without self-pity, just statement of fact. You learn. The fire popped. Nora found her own fingers and seemed astonished by them. The road to town, Della said. When will it clear? Cole looked at the window. 3 days, maybe 4. She'd already calculated this. She'd calculated it at 4 in the morning while walking Nora in circles. 4 days meant food, which meant she was eating his supplies for 4 more days, which meant she owed him, which meant the situation had weight and duration, and she needed to be clear about the terms before it got complicated. I'll work, she said, for the food and the shelter. Whatever needs doing. Cooking, mending, whatever you've got. You don't... Cole! She said his name the same way she said Jasper's name when he was about to argue about something she'd already decided. I don't take charity. I never have. I'll earn what we eat, or we'll eat less. Those are the terms. He looked at her over the rim of his cup. Something in his eyes that might have been respect, might have been amusement, was definitely not offense. All right, he said. Terms accepted. Good. She turned back to the stove. The fence on the south side. I saw it leaning when we came in last night. Is that a concern in this weather? A pause. You noticed that. In the dark. In a blizzard. I notice things. She stirred the oats. Is it a concern? It is, he said slowly. I've been meaning to reinforce the posts before the weight of the ice takes it down completely. 2 of the horses could get through if it goes. Can it wait 4 days? Probably 2. Maybe less if the ice builds tonight. Then that's the first thing when the storm clears. Cole set his cup down on the counter and looked at the back of her head with an expression she couldn't see and he didn't explain. After a moment, he said, I'll check the stock. Back in an hour. He was gone before she could answer. Jasper woke up 40 minutes later with the full energy of a child whose body has finished being sick and wants to make up for lost time. He came off the floor like something launched, looked around the cabin with wide, alert eyes and said, Where's the horses? Before he'd been awake 30 seconds. Good morning to you too, Della said. Sit down and eat. Mama, he said there were 4 horses. Jasper. Can I go see them? After you eat. All of it. He ate with extraordinary speed and efficiency, watching the door the whole time. Della set Nora in the cradle of her crossed legs and ate her own oats and watched her son and tried to remember the last time she'd seen him this animated. Somewhere before Colorado. Somewhere before everything got heavy, and Jasper started checking her face before he let himself feel anything. Reading her expression for permission to be okay. He was asking about horses. He wasn't checking her face first. She filed that away. Cole came back stamping snow off his boots, and Jasper was off the floor before the door finished opening. Can I see the horses? He said, standing 2 feet from Cole with his chin up. Not asking exactly. More like informing. Cole looked at Della. She nodded. Boots on, Cole said to Jasper. And your coat. And your hat. I know, Jasper said, with the weary authority of a child who's been dressing himself since 2. He had his coat on in 20 seconds and was at the door in 25. Cole looked at Della again. Something passed between them. The small, amused despair of adults confronted with a 4-year-old in a hurry. "I'll bring him back in one piece," Cole said. "I know you will." She looked at her son. "Jasper, what do you say?" Jasper turned back to Cole, squared up, and with great formal seriousness extended his hand. "Thank you for letting me see your horses, Mr. Hargrove." Cole shook it, solemnly. No smile, no condescension. Just one hand meeting another like they were equals conducting business. "You're welcome, Mr. McAllister." Jasper's face cracked into a grin so big it looked like it might exceed the available space, and he bolted through the door. Della listened to their boots cross the yard. Cole's heavy and steady, Jasper's quick and irregular, punching through crust. And then the barn door, and then quiet. She looked at Nora, who looked back at her. "Don't," Della said. Nora waved a fist. "I know what you're thinking, and the answer is no." Nora made a sound of profound disagreement. Della lifted her and pressed her lips to the top of her head and held her there for a moment, breathing in the particular smell of her. Warm milk and something sweeter underneath. The smell that was specifically, irreplaceably, Nora. "We're leaving in 4 days," she said into her daughter's hair. "That's all this is." She believed it when she said it. They came back an hour later, Cole and Jasper, and something had shifted between them in the barn. She didn't know what, didn't ask, but Jasper came back in talking, really talking. The fast, tumbling way he talked when he forgot to be careful, about which horse was the biggest and which one had tried to eat Cole's coat, and which one had let Jasper touch her nose. The brown one. The one Cole said was named Grace because she'd been born in a snowstorm and survived it. "Like us," Jasper said, pulling off his boots. "We were in a snowstorm." "You were," Cole said, "and we survived it." "You did." Jasper thought about this with great satisfaction. "Can Grace be my horse?" "Jasper," Della started. "She's not nobody's horse," Cole said. "She belongs to herself. But if she lets you touch your nose, that means she's decided she doesn't mind you. That's about as good as it gets with Grace." Jasper processed this with the focused gravity of a 4-year-old encountering a genuinely new idea. "Horses decide?" "Most things worth having decide for themselves," Cole said. He was hanging his coat on the peg, not looking at either of them, and his voice was level and ordinary. "Can't force trust, only earn it." Della stood at the stove and didn't say anything, and didn't look at him, and was very busy stirring something that didn't need stirring. The day settled into a rhythm that felt too natural for how recently they'd been strangers. Cole worked. There was always work on a ranch, even stormbound. Things to mend and oil and repair, wood to split and stack, inventory to count. Della kept the stove going, managed Nora's unpredictable schedule of eating and sleeping and loudly objecting to everything, and kept Jasper from destroying himself or the cabin through sheer excess energy. Mid-afternoon, she was mending the torn hem of Jasper's coat, the last usable coat she had for him, the one Roy had bought 2 sizes big so he could grow into it, when she heard Cole's voice from the far corner where he was working on a cracked harness. "You're good at that," he said. She looked up. He was watching her hands. "My mother taught me," she said. "She said a woman who can mend anything will never be truly stuck." She looked back at the stitches. "I've tested that theory pretty thoroughly." "Seems like it held." "Mostly." She pulled the thread through. "Roy was handy. He could fix most things that broke. Furniture, tools, the wagon. When he died, I realized how much I'd been relying on that without knowing it." She paused. "I've learned since." "What haven't you learned yet?" The question surprised her. Most people asked what she could do, not what she couldn't. She considered it honestly. "Horses," she said. "I can handle them well enough, hitch and drive, basic care, but I don't have the understanding of them, the thing you have." She glanced toward the barn. "Whatever you said to Jasper about Grace deciding for herself, I wouldn't have thought to say it that way."
Your husband wasn't a horseman?
He was a miner. The word carried its own weight, and she let it. He knew rock. He knew tunnels. He knew exactly how much weight a timber support could hold and where a vein was likely to run. She folded the mended coat, smoothed it with her palm. He was very good at his work. "But the timber failed," Cole said quietly. "The timber failed." She didn't look up. "It wasn't his fault. The company was cutting corners, using green wood, not seasoning it right. Roy knew it was wrong. He'd complained about it for 2 months. She set the coat aside. Nobody listened. The harness lay still in Cole's hands. He said nothing, which was exactly the right thing to say. "I don't blame him," Della said. "I want to be clear about that. I never did." She reached for the next thing that needed mending, one of Nora's blankets, a small tear in the corner. "But I spent 2 months being angry at the company, and then I realized that wasn't useful. And I've been figuring out what's useful ever since." "Seems like you've gotten fairly efficient at useful," Cole said. Something in his voice made her look up. He wasn't mocking her. He said it with a plainness that meant he was just saying what was true, and the simplicity of it landed somewhere she hadn't expected. "Cole." She said his name without planning to. He met her eyes. "The door down the hall. The closed one." His hands went still. "I'm not prying," she said quickly. "I just—" She stopped, restarted. "When we came in last night, I noticed it, and this morning I walked past it, and I could feel it." She kept her eyes on the blanket in her hands. "I had a box like that, after Roy. A wooden box he'd made for Nora, filled with things. I kept it locked for 2 months. I told Jasper there was nothing important in it." She heard Cole put the harness down. "One day, Nora needed the quilt inside. Roy's mother had made it, the softest thing we owned. So I opened it. She pulled the thread careful and even. It wasn't as bad as I'd made it in my head. The things were just things, and Nora needed the quilt." She looked up at him. "I'm not saying open the door. I'm saying I understand why it's closed." Cole was quiet for a long time. The fire talked. Nora made small sounds from her blanket. "Eleanor," he said finally. The name cost him something, but he paid it. She wanted children more than anything. We've been trying for 3 years. When she finally got pregnant..." He stopped, cleared his throat. "She didn't make it through the birth. Neither did the baby. A boy." His jaw worked. "I built that room with my own hands. Painted it. Built the cradle." He looked at the closed door down the hall. "Couldn't go in after. Couldn't take it apart either. So I closed the door." 6 years, Della said softly. 6 years. The weight of it sat between them, not uncomfortable, more like 2 people sitting on opposite sides of the same river and recognizing the current. "Does it help?" she asked. "Keeping it closed?" "No," he said, "but opening it felt like letting go, and I wasn't ready to let go." "I know," she said. "That's exactly it." From the floor, Jasper said, without looking up from the wooden horse Cole had given him to keep him occupied. "When we went to see Daddy's grave, Mama cried in the wagon, the whole way there and the whole way back. And when we got home, she made biscuits." Complete silence. Jasper looked up, apparently sensing the quality of the quiet. "Is that wrong to say?" "No, sweetheart," Della said carefully. "She makes biscuits when things are sad, Jasper told Cole, very informative. It's what she does. Cole looked at Della. She looked at Cole.
And then something happened that she hadn't felt in so long she'd almost forgotten what it felt like. The helpless, almost laugh that rises up when grief and love and exhaustion all hit the same nerve at once. She pressed her lips together. He looked away. Jasper looked between them. Satisfied with whatever he'd contributed to the conversation, he went back to his wooden horse. Della took a breath. "Would you eat biscuits?" she asked. Her voice was mostly steady. "If I made them tonight?" "I'd eat biscuits," Cole said. His voice was also mostly steady. "Then I'll make biscuits." She got up and went to the stove, and she felt his eyes on her back for a moment before he picked up the harness again, and she heard him resume working, and the rhythm of the afternoon settled back around them like snow settling after wind, quieter than before, and softer, and carrying the memory of the storm in every flake. Later, after Jasper was asleep, and Nora had exhausted herself into a 2-hour stretch that Della knew better than to count on, Cole sat at the table with the ranch ledger, and Della sat across from him with the mending basket. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. At some point, he reached past her for the lamp to see the columns better, and she smelled cold air and hay and something underneath it that was just him, and she moved the lamp closer to his side of the table without commenting on it, and he said, "Thanks," without looking up, and she went back to her mending. Outside, the temperature dropped another 10 degrees. Inside, the stove held. When she finally went to lay down, Jasper's warm weight on one side and Nora in her arms. She lay in the dark and listened to Cole settle into his room down the hall, and thought about what it meant that she wasn't calculating anymore, wasn't running the numbers on leaving, wasn't holding the walls up by force. She told herself it was exhaustion. 4 days, maybe 5, and they'd be gone, and Cole Hargrove would go back to his closed door and his one chair and his one cup on the shelf, and she'd be in Billings figuring out what came next. 4 days. She believed it less than she had this morning, and she noticed that, and chose not to examine why. Nora sighed against her chest, deep and content. Jasper muttered something in his sleep about Grace the horse. Down the hall, quiet. Della closed her eyes, and for the first time in 4 months, the dark didn't feel like something to get through. It just felt like night. The 4th day brought sun. Not warm sun. Wyoming in December didn't do warm. But the hard, bright kind that turned the snow into something that hurt to look at, and made the whole world feel scrubbed clean and merciless. Cole was out by first light, checking the south fence, and Della heard the rhythm of his hammer carrying across the yard through the cabin wall, while she got the stove going, and Jasper ate, and Nora conducted her morning assessment of the world and found it acceptable. The roads would clear by tomorrow, maybe the day after. Della told herself this was a relief, and kept herself busy enough not to examine whether it was. Jasper spent the morning attached to Cole, with a single-minded dedication he usually reserved for things he decided were his. He handed Cole tools before being asked, held fence posts steady with his small hands and enormous concentration, and talked the entire time about things that had no apparent connection to fence repair. Grace the horse, a boy named Henry from Kansas who'd once eaten a beetle on a dare. His theory that snow was clouds that got tired and lay down. Cole answered every single one, brief and level, never talking down, never pretending to listen when he wasn't. Della watched through the window while she mended, and felt something she wasn't ready to name move through her chest. She made herself look away. She was rolling out biscuit dough. She'd been making biscuits every other day, she'd noticed, and she chose not to examine that pattern either, when she heard the horse. One horse, moving deliberately through the snow on the road from town, not rushing. The kind of pace that meant the rider had somewhere to be,
and felt righteous about going there. Cole heard it too. She saw him stand up from the fence, turn, and something in the set of his shoulders changed, stiffened. The rider was a man in a dark coat and a preacher's collar, astride a bay horse, and he sat in the saddle the way certain men sit. Like the saddle was a pulpit, and the whole county was his congregation, whether it wanted to be or not.
Della set the biscuit cutter down. Jasper said from outside, "Who's that?" "Go inside," Cole said. Quiet. Absolute. Jasper went inside. He came to Della and stood next to her, and they watched through the window together as the man dismounted and tied his horse to the post and walked toward Cole with the deliberate stride of someone who has prepared what he's going to say. "That's Reverend Pruitt," Cole said when he came through the door 30 seconds later. His voice was careful. "He'll have seen the smoke from the cabin." He looked at Della. "He's going to want to talk." "To you or to me?" "Both." Cole held her eyes. "You don't have to come out. You don't have to say a word to him." "Is he dangerous?" "Not in the way you mean." Cole was quiet for a moment. "He's the kind of man who thinks he's protecting something, when he's really just afraid of anything he can't file into a category he already has." He paused. "He'll have questions." "Let him ask them," Della said. "Della, Cole," she untied her apron and hung it on the peg. "I've been answering for myself since I was 17. I don't need protecting from a man with a collar." She checked Nora in the sling, adjusted the knot. "Let's go." He looked at her for a beat, and there was something in his eyes, not quite pride, something quieter and more complicated than pride, before he turned and opened the door. Reverend Silas Pruitt was a tall man, lean the way cold climate people get lean, with pale eyes and a face built for disapproval. He stopped when Della came through the door behind Cole, and his expression did the thing she'd seen expressions do her whole life. The quick recalculation, the reassigning of categories. "Cole," he said, not looking away from Della, "I heard you had visitors." "News travels fast in a blizzard," Cole said. "Henderson passed your road 2 days ago. Said there was a woman." Pruitt's pale eyes moved to Della's belly and back to her face. "With children." "Della McAllister," Della said. She kept her voice even and her chin level, and her hands still at her sides. "Widow, 3 children. I was caught in the storm on the ridge trail, and Mr. Hargrove offered shelter." She met his eyes without blinking. "Is there a question in there somewhere, Reverend? Or are you just getting acquainted with the facts?" Pruitt's jaw tightened slightly. He wasn't used to being addressed that way, and especially not by a woman in her circumstances, standing on another man's porch. She could see him deciding how to respond. "Mrs. McAllister," he said, making her name sound like something he was filing. "I'm sure you understand that in a community like ours, appearances, she's a widow with a sick child in a blizzard," Cole said. His voice hadn't risen. It hadn't needed to. "She needed shelter. I provided it. That's the whole of it." "Cole, I'm not suggesting any impropriety. I'm suggesting that—" "What are you suggesting, Silas?" Not a question. Pruitt looked between them. His pale eyes did their calculating work. "There is a place," he said, and now his voice had shifted to the gentle mode, the pastoral mode, the mode that was somehow worse than the accusatory one. "At the county home in Clearwater, for women in difficult circumstances. It's warm and supervised and—" "I'm not going to a county home," Della said. Pruitt turned to her with the patient expression of a man explaining something to someone who hasn't understood. "Mrs. McAllister, you have 3 children, 1 not yet born, no husband, no income, and you are sheltering in the home of a single man. The county home would provide you everything except my dignity and my choice," Della said. "So no."
I'm afraid the situation as it stands, Cole said, stepping forward one step. One single measured step. Is that a woman and her children are safe and warm and fed, and none of that is your business, Silas. His voice was still level,
Still quiet. The kind of quiet that was louder than volume. I know you think you're doing right. I know you believe that. But you rode 12 miles in the cold to tell a pregnant widow to go to the county home instead of knocking on my door and saying, "Are you folks all right, and do you need anything?" He paused. That tells me something. Pruitt's face had gone carefully still. I hope you understand the position this puts you in. People will talk, Cole. People have always talked, Cole said. Hasn't slowed me down yet. Jasper appeared in the doorway behind Della. He looked at Pruitt with the frank appraisal of a 4-year-old who hasn't learned to disguise assessment as politeness. Are you the bad man? He asked. Jasper, Della said. Mr. Henderson said there was a bad man in the black coat who told people what to do. Jasper looked at the coat. You have a black coat? Pruitt looked at the child, then at Della, then at Cole. Something moved across his face. Not shame. He was too certain for shame, but something adjacent to it. The flicker of a man who has just heard his reputation summarized by a 4-year-old and finds it uncomfortable. I'll pray for your situation, Mrs. McAllister, he said finally. I'd rather you'd brought flour, Della said, but thank you all the same. Pruitt untied his horse. Cole and Della stood side by side on the porch and watched him mount and turn and ride back the way he'd come, slow and righteous through the snow. When he was out of sight, Jasper said, He didn't seem that bad. He's not bad, Cole said. He's certain. That's different. Jasper thought about this. What's the difference? Bad men usually know they're doing something wrong, Cole said. Certain men always think they're doing something right. He looked at Della. You okay? I've had worse, she said. And then, because it was true, and he'd stood beside her without being asked. Thank you. He'll tell the town, Cole said. I want you to know that. By Sunday, everyone in Clearwater Creek will know you're here. I know. That doesn't bother you? Della looked at him. Cole, I gave up worrying about what towns thought of me somewhere around the 3rd month of carrying a dead man's child alone on the Kansas plains. She turned and went back inside. Biscuits need to finish. He stood on the porch for a moment longer. Then he followed. That was the day things changed, in a way that was harder to dismiss. It happened in the evening, without announcement. Nora had been fussy since afternoon. The low-grade, persistent fussiness that wasn't hunger or cold or anything fixable. Just baby discontent. And Della had been walking her for 2 hours, and her back, the deep, low ache that had been building for 3 days, the kind she recognized from Nora's last weeks and Jasper's before that, was making itself impossible to ignore. She shifted Nora to the other shoulder. Nora screamed louder. Cole looked up from the harness he'd been repairing by lamplight. He set it down without a word, crossed the room, and held out his hands. Della hesitated. Your back is hurting, Cole said, simple as weather. Give her to me. She doesn't, Della started. I know. Give her to me anyway. Della handed Nora over. Nora, who had been purple-faced and furious, looked up at Cole with the baffled expression of someone who's found themselves in unexpected circumstances. She huffed twice, decided, and grabbed the front of his flannel shirt with both hands. Cole started walking, slow, even circles, the same ones Della had been walking, but he was humming, low and tuneless, barely more than a vibration in his chest. And something about it, the pitch of it, the steadiness, worked on Nora the way nothing else had for 2 hours. She didn't go to sleep. She just stopped fighting. Della sat down on the floor by the fire and pressed both hands to the small of her back and closed her eyes. "When is it due?" Cole said. He was still walking slow circles, not looking at her. 3 weeks, maybe less. She stretched carefully, feeling the pull. Nora came 3 weeks early, so this one might too. It runs in my family, my mother said. Children in a hurry. You'll need a doctor. I know. She breathed through a low wave of pressure that wasn't quite a contraction, more like a warning. Closest one is in Clearwater Creek. Doc Ambrose, he's good. Cole glanced at her. How are you feeling right now? Fine. She saw his expression. Honestly, just tired and achy. It's normal at this stage. She watched him with Nora. The big, careful hands, the steady rhythm, the unself-conscious patience. You're good at that. Eleanor used to say I had a talent for calming things down, Cole said. Animals, mostly. She said I had a rancher's stillness, that some things just need to feel something solid and quiet next to them. She was right. Cole looked down at Nora. I think about... He stopped. Continued walking. Started again. I think about what kind of father I would have been. I used to think about it a lot in the first years. Now it's less. But sometimes. You would have been a good one, Della said. She said it quietly and directly, the way she said things she meant without decoration. Cole didn't answer right away. He turned at the end of the room and started back. You don't know that, he said. I know you spent an hour with a 4-year-old holding fence posts and answered every single question he asked, including the one about why clouds don't fall. She watched him. I know that when Nora screams, your first instinct is to help, and your second instinct is to do it without making the mother feel useless. She looked at her hands. Those are not small things. The fire talked. Nora had gone heavy and drowsy against his shoulder. Jasper asked me today, Cole said, if I had any kids. Della looked up. I told him no. He said that was too bad because I was the kind of man who should. Cole's jaw moved. He said it the same way he says everything, like it was just a fact he was reporting. Della felt the thing she'd been not examining for 4 days press against the inside of her chest, like something trying to get out. Cole, I'm not saying anything, he said quickly. I know what this is. You're here 4 days, 5 tomorrow. I'm not making it into something it isn't. He kept his eyes on Nora. I just wanted you to know what he said. Okay, she said. And then, because it was true and refusing it would have been dishonest. He's right. Cole went very still. You should have had children, Della said. You would have been exactly the kind of father a child needs. She looked at the closed door down the hall. Eleanor knew that. That's probably why she picked you. The fire popped. Outside, the night was perfectly still, the after-storm stillness that was almost loud in its own way. Cole laid Nora down in her blanket nest with the careful deliberateness of a man concentrating very hard on a simple task. He straightened up. His back was to her. When you leave, he said, and the word leave had a weight to it that it hadn't had 2 days ago. Where will you go? Really? The question she'd been not asking herself. I'll figure it out, she said. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have. She met the back of his head. Cole, I'm not your responsibility. He turned around. I know you're not. His voice was level, but something underneath it wasn't. That's not what I'm saying. Then what are you saying? He looked at her for a long moment. She could see him choosing between the honest answer and the safe one. The internal battle visible in his face, which was not a face that hid things easily, despite years of practice. "I don't know yet," he finally said. "I just know that I haven't looked at that closed door once today without thinking about opening it." He held her gaze. "That's the first time in 6 years. So, whatever it means, I thought you should know." Della sat with that for a moment. "Cole," she said softly, "I am 8 months pregnant, widowed 4 months, with a 4-year-old and an infant, and no money and no permanent address." She said each thing plainly, not to dismiss him, but to make sure he was seeing it clearly. "That's what you're looking at." "I know what I'm looking at," he said. "I'm not an easy situation." "No," he agreed, "you're not." A pause. "Eleanor wasn't easy either. She argued with me for 2 years before she married me, told me I was too quiet and too stubborn and too attached to this land." He looked at the window, the dark outside it. "She was right about all three." He looked back. "I married her anyway." Della opened her mouth, closed it. Jasper's voice came from the sleeping area, drowsy and imperious. "Mama! Mama, I need water!" The moment broke like something fragile, and neither of them remarked on it. Della pushed herself up from the floor with the slow deliberateness of a woman 8 months pregnant, and Cole was at the water pail before she was halfway upright, filling the tin cup, carrying it to Jasper, crouching down while the boy drank with his eyes half closed. "Good?" Cole said. Jasper handed back the cup and lay down. He was asleep again in 45 seconds. Cole stayed crouched a moment, watching the boy's face smooth back into sleep. Della watched Cole watch her son. She thought, this is how it happens. Not in the dramatic moments, not in the storm or the fever or the standoff on the porch. In the water at bedtime. In the fence post held steady. In the tuneless humming that settles a screaming baby. In the small, ordinary moments that add up without asking permission, until one day you look around and realize they've built something. She thought, 4 days is not enough to know. She thought, and yet. The wave of pressure across her lower back came again, longer than before, and she breathed through it, with her hand pressed flat against the wall and her eyes closed. And when it faded, she was steady, and nothing had changed, and everything had. She didn't tell Cole about it, not yet, but she didn't dismiss it either. She lay down in the dark that night, with Jasper's warmth on one side and Nora's weight on her chest, and Cole's quiet down the hall, and thought about doors. The one in the hallway that hadn't opened in 6 years. The one she'd built around herself in Colorado. The one you didn't even notice you'd made until someone stood on the other side of it, and you realized you'd been listening for the knock without knowing you were listening. The pressure came again at 2 in the morning. Definitely longer. Definitely closer. Della lay still and counted. Breathed. Counted again. She thought, not tonight. Please not tonight. But the third one came 20 minutes later, and it was different from the others. Purposeful. Building. The kind her body knew even if her mind was arguing. And Della McAllister, who had survived 4 miles in a blizzard and a preacher's judgment, and 4 months alone and the slow dismantling of every plan she'd made, pressed her lips together, looked at the ceiling, and thought, so it's now then. She sat up carefully so as not to wake the children, and she went to knock on Cole Hargrove's door. She knocked twice, soft but deliberate. The silence on the other side lasted only a few seconds. The silence of a man who hadn't been fully asleep, which told her something she didn't have time to think about right now. Then boots on the floor, and the door opened, and Cole stood there in the lamplight, with his shirt half buttoned, and his eyes already asking the question before she could answer it. "It's time," Della said. He was completely awake in an instant. Not the groggy coming to that most people needed. Just one breath, and he was present, focused, reading her face with the same attention he gave a fence line in bad weather. "How far apart?" he said. 20 minutes, maybe less. They're moving fast." She braced one hand on the doorframe, through a tightening that started low and wrapped around her whole middle, and she breathed through it. Slow, steady, the way she'd done with Nora. And Cole stood completely still and waited. Didn't touch her without invitation. Didn't talk over the contraction. Just waited until it released, and she straightened up. Nora came in 4 hours from the first real one. This one's faster. Doc Ambrose is 12 miles, Cole said. He said it as a fact, not a panic, running the numbers out loud the same way she did. I know. Road's not clear enough for the wagon. Not at night. I know that too. She met his eyes. Cole, I've done this before. I know what I need. I need hot water, clean cloth, and someone who won't fall apart. She held his gaze. Are you that person, or do I need to do this alone? He looked at her for exactly 1 second. Tell me what to do. She told him. He had water on the stove inside of 2 minutes, moving through his own kitchen with the new economy of motion. No wasted steps, everything done in order. He dragged the washstand into the main room close to the fire. He found the cleanest linens in the chest without being asked twice. He checked on Jasper, still sleeping, deeply, the way children sleep when they've spent their whole day in cold air. And he positioned the lamp where she needed it, and then he came back to her and said, What else? If Nora wakes up, Della said, sitting on the edge of the washstand and breathing through another contraction, longer this time, the kind that meant things were progressing whether she was ready or not. She'll need you to walk her. The humming. She responds to that. I know she does. I know you know. She released the breath slow. I just needed to say it out loud. She looked at him. I'm not frightened. I want you to know that. I've been more frightened sitting in a wagon alone with nothing coming at all than I am right now. I believe you, he said. And he did. She could tell he did, which was different from the polite believing people did when they were really thinking something else. I was frightened with Nora, she said. The contraction had passed, and she had a window and she wanted to use it because there was something she needed him to understand before this was fully underway. I was alone in a storage shed outside a trading post in November. The midwife they'd sent for didn't make it. I did it by myself. She looked at her hands. Afterward, I sat there for 2 hours before anyone came to check on me. Nora was wrapped in my coat, and I was talking to her just to make sure she stayed awake. She looked up. I am telling you this, not because I need sympathy. I'm telling you because tonight is already better than that. And I need you to understand that you being here is not a small thing to me, even if I don't say it the way people usually say things. Cole was quiet. His jaw moved once. Understood, he said. And then, quiet and direct. I'm glad you knocked. The next contraction came and took her full attention, and they stopped talking about anything except what needed doing. Cole was steady in the way she'd known he would be. The rancher's stillness Eleanor had named. The quality of a man who had watched animals labor and understood that what was needed was not intervention, but presence. Not control, but attention. He brought water when she needed it, held the lamp when she needed light, moved when she told him to move, and stayed when she told him to stay. At some point, Nora woke up. Della heard her from across the room. The small, escalating sounds that would become a full cry in 30 seconds. And she was in the middle of a contraction, and she couldn't do anything about it. And she heard the sharp edge of panic at the edge of her own breath, because Nora screaming through this was going to make everything harder.
She heard Cole cross to the baby, heard him pick her up, heard Nora's escalation cut off, not immediately, but within a minute, replaced by that particular silence that meant she'd found his shoulder and decided it was acceptable. The contraction passed. Della looked over. Cole stood with Nora against his chest, one big hand spread across her small back, and he was doing the humming, the tuneless, steady vibration, and Nora had a fist wrapped in his flannel, and her eyes were half closed. He met Della's eyes over the baby's head, and he said nothing, and she said nothing, and the understanding between them required no words at all. She turned back to the work. She would not remember afterward exactly how long it took. Time moved differently during labor. It had with Jasper, it had with Nora, and it did now. There were long stretches of focused endurance and short windows of something almost like rest, and then the sustained final effort that was its own country entirely. A place where nothing existed except the body's absolute knowledge of what it was doing and the surrender required to let it. Cole stayed, held Nora with one arm, and used the other hand to pass what was needed when she needed it. He talked to her twice, not to distract or to comfort, but once to say, "You're doing right," when she was doubting it, and once, very quietly, to say her name when she needed to hear something outside her own head. Just that. Della. Her name in his voice, steady as the fire. It was enough. At 4:17 in the morning, by the clock on Cole's mantel, the baby came. A girl. She came into Cole Hargrove's hands in the lamplight of his cabin on the 5th day of their being there. And she announced herself with a cry so immediate and indignant and full that Nora startled awake on his shoulder, and Jasper turned over in his sleep across the room. And Della laughed, the real laugh, the short, surprised one, because the baby sounded furious and healthy, and exactly like someone who had opinions about the world and intended to share them. She's good," Cole said. His voice had changed. It was different in a way she couldn't entirely describe, except that it was the voice of a man touching something he had not let himself near in a very long time. Della, she's good. Let me see her." He wrapped the baby in the warm cloth he'd had ready and placed her against Della's chest and stepped back, and Della looked at her daughter. Dark hair slicked flat, face scrunched and red and furious, fingers spread wide as if already reaching for something. And she felt the thing she'd felt with Jasper and with Nora, the recognition, the absolute specific knowledge of this person, this new person who had not been in the world 10 seconds ago. "Hello," Della said. "I know you. I've known you for 8 months." The baby blinked. "You've been kicking me for 8 months," Della said. "I know every single one of your opinions already." The baby made a sound. Cole stood 3 feet away with his hands at his sides and his face doing something complicated and private, and Della let him have it. After a while, she said, "Thank you." "Don't thank me," he said. "You did all of it." "You stayed." "Of course I stayed." She looked at him. He was looking at the baby. She watched him look at the baby, and she thought about Eleanor, about the room down the hall, about the cradle he built with his own hands and closed the door on for 6 years. She thought about what it had cost him to stand in this room tonight and be present for this. What door he'd had to open inside himself that he hadn't opened yet in the hallway. "Cole," she said softly. He met her eyes. "Her name," Della said. She paused, feeling the weight of what she was about to say and not pulling away from it. "I want to call her Eleanor." The sound he made was not quite a word. His hand came up to his mouth for a moment. He turned away, 1 step, and she gave him that too, gave him the half-minute he needed, heard his breath come unsteady and then steady itself. When he turned back, his eyes were wet, and he didn't apologize for it. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I know I don't have to," Della said. "I want to. She was born in your home. You helped bring her here. And you're Eleanor." She looked at the baby's face. "The woman you loved built you into the man who kept his door open in a blizzard and held a stranger's baby and answered every question a 4-year-old asked without once making him feel small." She looked up. "That woman is part of why this baby is alive. She ought to have her name." Cole stood very still. "Eleanor Rose," Della said, "if that suits you." He nodded. His jaw was working. He nodded again, like the first one hadn't been enough. "It suits," he said. His voice came out rough and quiet. "It suits her." Jasper woke up at first light, stumbled toward the stove looking for breakfast, and stopped dead in the middle of the room. He looked at his mother on the pallet by the fire. He looked at the baby. He looked at Cole, sitting in the chair nearby with Nora asleep across his knees, both of them exhausted and still in the particular way of people who have been through something together. "That baby's new," Jasper said. "Yes, it is," Della said. "Where did it come from?" "She," Della said. "She came from me. She was inside me, remember? We talked about this." Jasper processed this with his habitual, solemn thoroughness. "Does she have a name?" "Eleanor Rose." Jasper looked at Cole. Cole looked at Jasper. "That's a big name," Jasper said. "It's for a big person," Cole said. "She just doesn't know it yet." Jasper came closer, crouched down, and examined Eleanor Rose McAllister with the focused attention of a scientist examining new data. Eleanor, for her part, was asleep with absolute commitment and did not perform for her audience. "She's small," Jasper said. "Nora was smaller," Della said. "She's still pretty small." He looked at Nora on Cole's knee, then back at Eleanor. He appeared to be conducting some internal calculation. Then he looked up at Cole again. "Did you help?" "I did," Cole said. Jasper nodded slowly, with the gravity of a man issuing a verdict. "Good," he said. And then, in the completely ordinary tone he used for all announcements of equal importance, "Can I have oats?" Cole laughed. The real kind, sudden and undefended. The same one that had surprised both of them a week ago over the oats comment. And Della lay back against her pillow and laughed too. And Eleanor Rose slept through all of it, undisturbed and entirely certain of her welcome. That afternoon, while the children slept and the winter light came flat and low through the window, Cole brought Della tea and sat down on the floor with his back against the wall, and they were quiet for a long while, in the way they'd gotten comfortable with quiet over the past days. Then Della said, "The road will clear tomorrow." Cole said nothing. "Or the day after." Still nothing. "Cole," she looked at him. He was looking at Eleanor, asleep in the crook of her arm. "I need to ask you something direct, and I need you to answer me direct. No being careful, no protecting me from what you actually think." He met her eyes. "All right. Is what you said last night, before, I mean, about the door, about looking at it differently?" She kept her voice steady. "Was that the moment talking? The closeness of it, the situation, or—" She stopped. "I need to know if it's real. Because I have 3 children now, and I can't afford to mistake kindness for something else and then have to untangle it later. I've done hard things. That would be among the hardest." Cole was quiet for a moment. She respected that he didn't answer immediately. "I've been alone 6 years," he said finally. "I've been alone long enough that I stopped feeling the alone. Like how you stop smelling the thing you smell every day." He looked at his hands. You've been in this cabin 5 days, and I can't remember what it felt like before the noise. Before Jasper's questions, and Nora's schedule, and the sound of you at the stove in the morning." He looked up.
That's not the moment talking. The moment made me say it out loud. The feeling has been building since the first night. Della looked at him. "I'm not a man who moves fast," Cole continued. "I'm not going to ask you for anything today, or tomorrow, or next week. I know what you have in front of you. I know what recovering from last night looks like. I know you've got 3 children under 5 and no certainty about anything." He paused. "But I want to be honest because you asked for honest. I don't want you to leave. I don't want to watch you walk down that road and go back to what this place was before you knocked my door down with your shoulder." Della looked at Eleanor's sleeping face. "I'm not easy," she said. "I know that. I'm stubborn, and I have opinions about everything, and I will not be managed. I noticed. I have 3 children. I noticed that, too." Something in his voice that she was starting to recognize as his version of humor. Hard to miss, in fairness. She looked at him for a long moment. This man who had held her newborn in the lamplight with his dead wife's name in his eyes, and not once made her feel like a burden, or a charity case, or a category to be filed. Who had sat on his own floor to eat. Who had answered every one of Jasper's questions. "I don't know what I'm saying yet," she said. "I need to recover from last night, and I need to sleep, and I need to think." She held his gaze. "But I'm not saying no. I want you to know that." She paused. "I'm not saying no." Cole nodded. Once. Slow. The nod of a man receiving news he'd needed and hadn't let himself want too much, in case it didn't come. "Rest," he said. He stood, reached down and tucked the blanket closer around Eleanor, without touching Della, careful and precise. "We've got time." He went to check the stock. Della lay in the afternoon light, with Eleanor against her chest, and Jasper's even breathing across the room, and the sounds of Cole's boots crossing the yard outside. And she thought about the word time. She had spent 4 months running from Colorado, running from the closed store account and the neighbor's sympathy, and the shape of the room that used to have Roy in it, running toward Billings, toward her aunt, toward the idea of a plan, even when the plan was flimsy. She hadn't stopped running until the blizzard stopped her. She looked at the closed door down the hall. She thought about boxes and quilts and the things you kept locked until a baby needed what was inside. She thought, time. Outside, Cole's hammer started up, steady and unhurried, the sound of a man working his land. Della closed her eyes. Eleanor Rose breathed against her chest, small and certain, and named after a woman she'd never meet. For the first time in 4 months, Della McAllister did not think about the road. The road cleared on the 7th day. Cole saw it first, coming back from the morning feed, and he stood at the cabin door for a moment before going in, looking at the rutted track that ran from his gate toward Clearwater Creek, now passable, now real. Now an actual option, in a way it hadn't been for a week. He went inside and didn't mention it. Della noticed anyway. She noticed because she'd been watching the road every morning the same way he had. And when he came in without the particular tension of a man calculating impassable drifts, she knew. She was nursing Eleanor at the table, and she looked at him over the baby's head, and he looked back. And neither of them said the word road. Jasper said it for them. He came in from the porch where he'd been conducting some private investigation of the snow conditions and announced, with the authority of a 4-year-old who has made an important discovery. "The road's clear." "I see that," Della said. "We could go to town." "We could." Jasper looked at Cole. "Are we going to town?" Cole poured his coffee. "That's your mama's call." Jasper transferred his gaze back to Della.
with the focused patience of someone waiting for a verdict that affects him considerably. Della looked at Eleanor. Eleanor was not concerned with roads. Eleanor was concerned with breakfast and had strong feelings about interruptions. "Not today," Della said. Jasper processed this. "Tomorrow? I don't know yet, Jasper." He accepted this with the pragmatism of a child who has learned that "I don't know yet" is a different answer from "no," and went back outside to resume his investigation. Cole sat down across from her. He wrapped both hands around his cup and looked at the table and then at her, and she could see him deciding whether to say the thing he was thinking. "Say it," she said. "I don't want to push you." "You're not pushing me. Say it." He was quiet for a moment. "I've been thinking about what comes next, and I don't want to think about it wrong." He met her eyes. "I told you I wasn't going to ask you for anything this week. I meant that. But the road being clear changes the math. And I don't want you making decisions about leaving because you think that's what I expect." "Is it what you expect?" "No." No hesitation. Della looked at Eleanor's face, the small, perfect, closed-eye concentration of a baby, entirely committed to the task at hand. 7 days old, born in this cabin in the lamplight, with this man's hands steady and sure. Named for the woman in the room down the hall. "Cole," she said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to think about it before you answer. Really think, not just say what's kind." "All right." "3 children," she said. "The oldest is 4, and he will talk to you without stopping from sunrise to sunset. And some of it will make sense, and some of it will be about beetles. The middle one is 3 months, and she does not sleep through the night, and she may not sleep through the night for another 4 months. The youngest is 1 week old, and she is already louder than both of them combined, and she is only going to get more opinionated." She looked at him steadily. "That is what you are looking at. Not the idea of a family, the actual thing, with all the noise and the cost and the work." "I know what I'm looking at," Cole said. "I know you think you do. I'm asking you to be certain." He set his cup down. He folded his hands on the table, and he looked at her with the directness she'd come to understand was his version of openness. No performance, no softening, just the thing itself. "When I was 22, he said, "I spent 3 weeks building a fence line across the north pasture. Hard ground, bad weather, posts that didn't want to set right. Every day I thought about quitting. Every day I went back out." He paused. "That fence has held for 20 years. The things worth having don't come easy, and they don't come quiet, and they don't come without cost." He held her gaze. "I know what I'm looking at, Della. I've been looking at it for 7 days, and I haven't looked away once." Della was quiet for a moment. "There's something else," she said. "Tell me." "Pruitt will talk. He already has. You ride in the Clearwater Creek with me and 3 children. People will draw conclusions, and some of those conclusions will make your life harder." She kept her voice even. "I've lived with people drawing conclusions about me for a long time. I've made my peace with it. But you live here. These are your neighbors, your community." "My community," Cole said, "watched me be alone for 6 years and called it self-sufficiency and left me to it." Something in his jaw. "The ones worth keeping will come around. The ones who won't, I'll manage." "You make it sound simple." "It's not simple. It's just decided." He looked at her. "For me, it's decided, Della. I'm not asking you to match that today. I'm just telling you where I stand, so you know the ground you're standing on." Eleanor finished nursing and made her opinion of the conclusion known in the direct way she had. Della lifted her, settled her against her shoulder, and stood and walked her the slow circle that was already muscle memory after 7 days.
past the stove and the window, and the closed door down the hall. She stopped at the door. She stood there with Eleanor's warm weight against her shoulder and her hand flat on the wood, and she felt the stillness behind it, the particular quality of a kept grief. And she thought about what she'd said to Cole the second morning, about boxes and quilts and the things you kept locked until you needed what was inside. She thought, he said he looked at this door differently now. She thought, some doors need two people to open. She turned around. Cole was watching her from the table. "Come here," she said. He came. He stood beside her at the closed door, and she could feel the tension in him. Not fear, exactly, more like the held breath of someone standing at the edge of something that drops away steeply. "You don't have to," she said. "I know." He looked at the door. His hand came up and rested beside hers on the wood, not touching her hand, just close. "I built this room," he said quietly. "I built it when Eleanor was 5 months gone. She picked the window placement, said she wanted morning light because baby should wake up to sun." He stopped. "I never told anyone that." "Morning light," Della said softly. She was right about most things. His voice was steady, but the steadiness cost him. I want Eleanor Rose to have morning light too." He looked at her. "If you'll let me do that, if you'll let me open this door and make it hers." Della looked at him. This man who had kept this room locked for 6 years and was offering to open it not because he'd moved past the grief, but because he'd found something to move toward. "Open it," she said. He turned the handle. The door swung in on a room full of morning light, exactly as his Eleanor had wanted. The sun coming through the east-facing window and laying itself across the floor in a long gold bar. A rocking chair in the corner. A cradle near the window, hand-built, solid, waiting with the patient endurance of something made with care for a purpose it hadn't yet fulfilled. Cole stood in the doorway and didn't move for a moment. Della stood beside him and let him have the moment for as long as he needed it. Then Eleanor rose, draped over her mother's shoulder, turned her head toward the light the way newborns do, instinctive and certain, and made the small sound that meant she was taking stock. Cole looked at the baby, at the cradle, back at the baby. "The cradle needs to be tested," he said. His voice was rough at the edges. "I should make sure it's still sound before she sleeps in it." "Of course," Della said. He went and checked every joint with his hands, methodical, testing each piece the way a craftsman checks his own work, with the ruthlessness of knowing exactly where the flaws might be. He rocked it, once, twice. It moved smooth and quiet and even. "It'll hold," he said. Della crossed to the cradle and laid Eleanor Rose inside. The baby looked up at the morning light coming through the window. Her fist came open. Her eyes moved, slow and unfocused and new, tracking the brightness. Cole stood at the foot of the cradle with his hands at his sides and his face doing the private, complicated thing that she'd stopped trying to interpret and started simply witnessing. "She looks right in there," he said finally. "She does," Della said. He reached out and rocked the cradle once, gentle. Eleanor's eyes drifted toward the motion, ancient reflex, deeply satisfied. Her fist closed again. Della put her hand on Cole's arm. Not dramatic, not a declaration, just her hand on his arm. The way you reach out to someone standing next to you at the edge of something significant. He put his hand over hers. They stood there in Eleanor's room, with morning light on the floor, and the baby in the cradle, and the rocking chair in the corner, and 6 years of locked grief, unlocked and present, and transformed into something that was still grief, but was also, unmistakably, something else. Jasper appeared in the doorway. "Oh," he said, looking around with wide eyes. This room was closed. It was, Cole said. Did you open it? We did. Jasper examined the room with his characteristic thoroughness. He looked at the cradle. He looked at the rocking chair. He looked at the light on the floor. Then he looked at Cole with the expression he used when he was asking the real question underneath the surface question. Is this Eleanor's room now? He said. The new Eleanor? Yes, Cole said. Jasper considered this. The old Eleanor would be okay with that, he said, because she's in heaven and she doesn't need a room. Cole's breath moved differently for a moment. That's right, he said. Jasper nodded, satisfied, and went back to his morning activities. Cole looked at Della. Della looked at Cole. He's 4 years old, she said, and her voice wasn't entirely steady. I know, Cole said, and his wasn't either. 3 days later, Cole hitched the wagon and they drove into Clearwater Creek. Not because they had to. The supplies were adequate for another week, and Della was still recovering, and Eleanor was only 10 days old, and there were a dozen practical reasons to wait. They went because Della had decided it was time to stop waiting, and because Cole had understood when she said it that she didn't mean the trip to town. She meant all of it. She meant the deciding. She wore her blue dress, the better one, the one she'd kept folded at the bottom of her bag through 4 miles of blizzard and 7 days of cabin life. She'd pressed it against the warm side of the stove the night before to work out the creases. She didn't explain why. Cole didn't ask. He wore his good coat and he shaved, which he didn't do every day, and Jasper noticed and said, "You look different." And Cole said, "Good different or bad different?" And Jasper said, "Like you're going somewhere important," which was the most accurate possible answer. They drove into Clearwater Creek, with Jasper between them on the wagon seat, and Nora in Della's arms, and Eleanor Rose in the basket Cole had padded with the softest blanket in the house. The town was small. A main street, a general store, a church, a livery, a doctor's office, a scattering of houses. People saw them coming from a distance. People always saw things coming from a distance in small towns. By the time Cole drew the wagon up in front of the general store, there were 4 people on the boardwalk who had found reasons to be there. Della felt their eyes. She'd felt eyes like these her whole life. The measuring kind. The categorizing kind. The kind that were already writing the story before she'd opened her mouth. Cole climbed down and came around to her side, and held his hand up to help her down with Eleanor. And he did it in front of everyone, without looking around to see who was watching. She took his hand and stepped down and stood on the boardwalk of Clearwater Creek, Wyoming, with her newborn daughter and her infant, and her 4-year-old son, who was already looking toward the livery with the focused intensity of a child who has identified horses in his vicinity. A woman came out of the general store, 50, strong-built, with the direct eyes of someone who'd run a business alone long enough to have developed an opinion about everything. "Cole Hargrove," she said, not unfriendly, assessing. "Mrs. Holt," Cole touched his hat brim. "This is Della McAllister. She and her children were caught in the storm. She's been at the ranch." Mrs. Holt looked at Della, looked at Eleanor in her arms, looked at Nora, looked at Jasper, who had abandoned the livery interest in favor of examining something on the boardwalk that had caught his attention. "You all right?" she said to Della. Not the polite version, the real version. "Better than I've been in a while," Della said. Mrs. Holt held her eyes for a moment, with the weighing look that was really about deciding whether you were being honest. Then she nodded once, the nod of a woman who has decided something. "Baby's healthy?" 10 days old and already loud," Della said. "Very healthy." Something shifted in Mrs. Holt's face. "My sister's girl was born in a storm," she said. "Turned out to be the strongest of the lot." She looked at Cole. "You need supplies?" "And a few other things," Cole said.
They went inside. Reverend Pruitt found them there 20 minutes later, which Della had calculated he would. He came through the door with the air of a man who has something to say and has been thinking about how to say it since he got up that morning. He stopped when he saw them. Cole at the counter, Della beside him with Eleanor, Jasper perched on a barrel eating the peppermint stick Mrs. Holt had produced from some private reserve, swinging his legs and watching everything. Pruitt looked at all of it. Cole turned around, unhurried. Silas? Pruitt looked at the baby, at Della, at the way they stood close together, not touching, but the way people stand when the space between them has been decided. He did his calculating. His pale eyes moved to Jasper on the barrel. Jasper looked at him. "Hello," Jasper said. "You rode a long way to tell my mama to go to the county home." The store went very quiet. Pruitt's jaw worked. "I rode," he said carefully, "to ensure Mrs. McAllister's situation was—" "She's fine," Jasper said. "We all are, mister. Cole helped my mama have the new baby, and he made a room for her, and he let me name my horse." He considered. "I named her Storm because I found her in one." Mrs. Holt made a sound behind the counter that was not quite a laugh. Pruitt looked at Cole. Cole looked back at him without expression, waiting with the patience of a man who has decided how this goes and is in no hurry. "I misjudged the situation," Pruitt said finally. The words appeared to cost him something measurable. He looked at Della. "Mrs. McAllister, I hope you'll accept, I was not wrong to be concerned, but I may have been wrong in my conclusions." Della looked at him for a moment. She had not forgotten the county home. She had not forgotten the pale, dismissing eyes. But she had also lived long enough to know the difference between a man who is genuinely wrong and a man who is genuinely wicked. And Pruitt was the former, which didn't excuse it, but did change how you responded. "Apology accepted, Reverend," she said. "Concerned is fine. Certain is where it went wrong." He blinked. He hadn't expected grace. He nodded, once, with more humility than she'd have predicted he was capable of, and he bought his tobacco and left. Mrs. Holt set both hands on the counter and looked at Della with undisguised appreciation. "I've been wanting to say something like that to Silas Pruitt for 11 years, she said. "Someone should have," Della said. That was the day Clearwater Creek decided about Della McAllister. Not all of it. Small towns didn't decide all at once. There would be women who crossed the street for a month, and men who talked over their fences, and a few who never came around at all. But Mrs. Holt told the story at her counter for a week, and the story did the work stories do. And by the following Sunday, when Cole drove them to the church, his first Sunday inside in 3 years, which people noticed, the balance had shifted. They sat in the third pew, Jasper between them, Nora in Della's arms, Eleanor Rose in Cole's, because she'd fussed when they loaded the wagon, and he'd taken her without being asked, and she'd gone immediately quiet, and he'd been holding her ever since, with the natural ease of a man whose arms have learned a particular weight. Della noticed the congregation noticing. She didn't look around. She looked at the front of the church and let them look. On the way home, Jasper fell asleep between them on the wagon seat, his head ending up on Cole's leg, his feet on Della's, spread across both of them in the proprietary way of children who have decided about something. Cole drove with one hand, his other hand resting on Jasper's back without thinking about it. Della looked at the mountains, blue, white, and enormous against the sky, the same mountains that had nearly killed them 3 weeks ago. "I want to talk about what comes next," she said. "All right," Cole said. "Legally," she said. "Practically. I want to do it right, or not at all." She looked at him. "I've had enough of halfway." "So have I," he said. "The circuit judge comes through in March," she said. "Mrs. Holt told me." Cole was quiet for a moment. "March is 6 weeks." "I know." "You'd want to stay through March." "I'd want to stay past March," Della said. "That's what I'm saying." Cole looked straight ahead at the road, the mountains, the land that was his, and that she was looking at differently than she'd looked at any land since Colorado. She saw him absorb what she'd said. Not with surprise. He'd been hoping for it, she knew that. But with the particular care of a man receiving something he'd been afraid to want too much. "Then stay," he said. The simplest sentence, the truest one. "I will," she said. Equally simple, equally true. Jasper slept between them all the way home. Eleanor rose, in her basket at their feet, slept with a deep conviction of a baby who has been informed that her accommodations are permanent. The ranch came into view as the road curved. The cabin, the barn, the fence line Cole had repaired, the cottonwood tree behind the house where the graves were, where Eleanor lay with their son, where Della had gone one morning alone and stood for a long while without explaining herself, and come back with steady eyes. Cole drew the wagon up and set the brake, and they sat for a moment before climbing down. "Cole," Della said. He looked at her. "I'm going to be difficult sometimes," she said. "I'm going to have opinions about how things are done, and I'm not going to change them just because someone else has a different opinion." "I know that." "Jasper's going to follow you everywhere and ask you things until you want to move to another county." "I know that too." "Nora doesn't sleep." "I've noticed. Eleanor is going to be louder than all of them combined." "She already is." Della looked at him. "And none of that is going to be easy." "No," Cole said. "It's not." He held her gaze. "I spent 6 years with Easy. Easy nearly finished me." He climbed down from the wagon and came around to her side and held up his hands. And she handed him Eleanor Rose first, and he settled the baby against his shoulder with the unconscious ease of someone who has stopped counting the times. And then he helped Della down, and she stood in front of the cabin door in the winter light with all of them around her. Jasper still half asleep, being lifted by Cole's other arm. Nora beginning to announce her displeasure about the cold. Eleanor unfazed. And she looked at the man holding 2 of her children, like he'd been doing it forever. She thought about the ridge trail, about the 4 miles, about the knife in the frozen door and the lit window, and the man who stepped aside. She thought about the things that look like accidents until you're on the other side of them, and you can see they were the whole point. She took Eleanor from his arms so he could manage the door, and she stood in the doorway of the cabin that had become her home in the space of 3 weeks. And she understood that some storms don't destroy you. Some storms just drive you to exactly the door you needed to knock on. Cole got the door open and took Jasper inside, and Nora made her views on the temperature thoroughly known. And Eleanor looked at the lamplight with her new eyes. And Della McAllister walked through the door of the Hargrove Ranch and did not look back at the road. She was done with roads. She was home.